You know, it would be nice if I could cover more stuff that I would like to cover on this show. I've wanted to talk about things like how and why Oh Mr. Porter is still funny after more than 85 years, or why the return to steam of the Adams T3 is such a big deal, or how railway heritage is trying to become more sustainable. But with announcements like the one on July the 5th about the decision to close most of the UK's ticket offices at railway stations, it kind of puts the kibosh on doing things I want to do and instead helps spread the word for the greater good.
Shut it!
Cheers, Simon. To clarify, this is a map which specifies which ticket offices are planned for closure, and if you look carefully in the southeast, it looks like they survive relatively unscathed. According to Southeastern, 40 out of 140 ticket offices have been listed to close, mostly at stations where pay-as-you-go travel by Oyster and contactless is normal. But villages like Pluckley, famous for being one of the most haunted places in England, are still having their ticket offices cleared out in anticipation of such closure, despite not being officially listed. Elsewhere in the UK, if you look in places like the Greater Manchester area, along the south coast, the Isle of Wight, parts of East Anglia, Leeds and scatterings through the north of England, there seems to be a noticeable trend. Wales is spared of these closures, Scotland is mostly spared apart from 2 stations in the Glasgow area, one of which alarmingly is Glasgow Central, but it mostly seems to be in built-up areas with access to one of the UK's key junctions. Now you could make the argument that ticket offices are being made redundant by the use of machines and apps, and yeah, there's no denying that it is easier for a tech-savvy human to book a ticket online rather than have to queue at the ticket office, especially if you've overslept and you've got seconds to catch your train instead of minutes. Now you may be asking yourself, what's the big deal? The press are saying that the ticket offices will be closing, but it'll bring staff out onto the platforms to interact more with the public. But if Mick Lynch is anything to go by, and he has been quite a bit over the last year or so in particular, what keeps station staff employed are the regulations put in place for the ticket offices. If the offices go, the legal obligation to keep staff on stations goes. If the legal obligation goes, then what's to stop the operating companies from de-staffing stations when they look at maximising their profits and reducing overheads even further? In the long run, how exactly is this in the interest of the passengers? I don't just mean the elderly, the disabled, the hard of hearing, those who fear travelling on public transport over the privacy and security of their own car, those with learning difficulties or suffer from sensory overloads, or those who don't know their way around server errors, let alone smartphones, but the public as a whole. A naive view would be that a reduction in ticket offices would make the tickets cheaper, but in reality, reducing checkout staff at supermarkets hasn't made food prices much cheaper. At best, it barely seems to have offset the cost of making the food to begin with. So where's the benefit of this cost-cutting going to be? If previous cost-cutting is anything to go by, it won't go towards maintaining the infrastructure because Network Rail reportedly generates just 25% of its revenue from operating company fees, with the rest either coming from real estate or public grants and subsidies. I mean, I could be wrong here, and I'm very happy to be proven wrong on this occasion because it's for the benefit of the rail industry and the passengers who rely on it, but where is the saved money likely to end up? Going towards a pay rise for existing staff, who may only seem to get a pay rise so they don't end up dipping below the national minimum wage? Reinvestment back into existing infrastructure? Or will it end up going to shareholders and subsidising overseas services owned by the same franchise holders of the UK's companies? Another question is, what measures will be put in place for preventing the subsequent increase in fare dodgers? Unless every station is fitted with ticket barriers, which would result in even more money being invested in every station on the network, then what incentive will passengers have to buy a ticket when there's no ticket office, the machines are either congested with queues or broken, and there's no conductor on their train? What happens if someone boards their train in the middle of nowhere with a machine that's seldom working and the gate line at the main station doesn't buy their story about the lack of ways to buy a ticket and slaps them with a penalty fare instead? No way to get a ticket, but lots of ways to get a fine. You can thank the wandering Turnip for that slogan. Please feel free to send him some love. Speaking of penalties, how much are they at the moment anyway? Well, according to nationalrail.co.uk, a penalty fare paid within 21 days is £50 plus the original fare for your journey. If it's left until after 21 days, it's £100 plus ticket fare. So the system can actually make more money from penalising a passenger than selling them a ticket. I hope there's no hidden incentive there. If there is, it doesn't seem to be coming from the frontline staff. If anything, ticket offices normally manage to find loopholes to provide the most affordable fares for the passengers, while machines default to whichever option generates the most money for the company. For instance, if you bought a day return from Taunton to Paddington at peak hours from the machine, it would cost you £297.80. But if you knew your way around the system and you knew to split your ticket at Castle Carey, Westbury, Pewsey and Reading, and if a member of staff advised you to travel on an ever so slightly later train, that would be reduced to just £74. So you could effectively get 4-day returns for the price of one. But no machine is going to prompt you to get the cheapest tickets possible. And if you book your tickets on Trainline only for your service to be cancelled, don't expect a member of the railway staff to issue a refund. That's a problem for Trainline to sort, not them. From speaking to a few people in the industry that this will likely affect, the plans to do away with ticket offices haven't come about as a result of recent strike action causing so much disruption, but they've been talked about since 2021. Right, sorry, I apologise for the stuttering here. I'm going off script at the moment here. But did you ever see that movie Brassed Off? You know, about the coal mine that's closing down and the colliery's brass band is struggling to play on despite their communities crumbling around them. Pete Postlethwaite's desperate to hold things together. I think Ewan McGregor's in there as well at some point. But anyway, do you remember there was a scene in there where Tara Fitzgerald's character confronts the colliery's board of directors and she learns that the decision to close the mine was actually taken far, far earlier than she was anticipating?
The decision to close it wasn't made today. It was made weeks ago.
Wrong. 2 years ago.
That feels exactly like what seems to be happening in the rail industry. I mean, I can only imagine how some frontline workers must have felt when their managers were told when the news broke that this decision had been made long before the press broke this story. I mean, it must have been heartbreaking for them. I feel for them. I really feel for them. At the end of the day, where is it all going to end? We're not going to end up with a system of driverless trains like those on the Docklands Light Railway because, as Jago Hazzard has pointed out already, that'll come with a stream of expensive and agnostic complications. I've already relayed the story of how a human tried to inform passengers at Reddish North about a last-minute platform change, but the automated bot didn't have a clue. But imagine if that became the norm everywhere. Speaking for myself, if the UK ends up having the same system that's in place in Baltimore, where unmanned wayside stations don't tell you about platform changes, or track changes, at the last minute due to the automated announcements not keeping you updated and trains are dispatched almost entirely by the onboard conductors, except at the busiest of places, that is, if conductors can keep their jobs here, then so help us. And I say speaking for myself because the exact same thing happened to me when I had to rely on MARC trains to get me to and from BWI Airport on multiple occasions. And to anyone who's going to say that this is the 21st century and ticket offices and guards are out of date and we shouldn't stop progress just because of humans, well then, I wish all those people the very best of luck when their train has a collision in the middle of nowhere, the driver's been killed, the cab's caught fire, and there's no way for them to get out because the guards have all been sacked and the subsequent fire caused the electrics to fuse and lock all the doors. I mean, people can scoff at that idea, but once upon a time nobody thought that Armagh would happen. Imagine if no humans were around to help survivors back then. This probably won't make a lot of difference, but it's worth considering that frontline workers in the rail industry have been under so much strain since we were told to stay indoors, but despite the hardships, they've been working their arses off to make sure that trains can still run safely. We may find so much to complain about the service being overpriced and not up to standard, but without staff being able to man stations, guard trains, sell the best tickets, answer inquiries and prevent suicide, assault, abuse and whatnot, women wouldn't feel safe from predators, suicides wouldn't be prevented, non-tech savvy people wouldn't have anyone to ask for help, cancelled trains would leave passengers stranded with non-refundable tickets and nobody to help them out, passengers would be left without advice on how to save stacks of money, and Tim Dunn wouldn't have been helped out when he was assaulted by another passenger on the 9th of June. So, in the interest of getting some discourse going, what do you think of the news to close down ticket offices? Do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea? Is your local ticket office listed for closure? Do you have any stories of rail staff helping you out when machines failed? Or do you simply have time on your hands? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I mean, I'd normally joke about discussing things like this in the pub, but it's best to be more public about this matter. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.